What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected voices comes face to face with late-night television's most controversial host? You won't believe what unfolds when Morgan Freeman sits down with Jimmy Kimmel for what was supposed to be a routine, promotional interview, only to witness one of the most explosive confrontations in talk show history. This isn't just another celebrity spat. This is a master class in how quickly respect can turn to disgust, and how a single question can ignite a firestorm that will have the entire entertainment industry talking. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds when these two titans of their respective worlds collide in the most unexpected way possible. Last night's episode of Jimmy Kimmel Live started like any other. The studio audience was buzzing with anticipation as they prepared to welcome the legendary Morgan Freeman, who was scheduled to promote his latest film project. Freeman, known for his commanding presence and thoughtful demeanor, had been making the rounds on various talk shows throughout the week, delivering his trademark wisdom and dry humor to delighted audiences everywhere he went. What nobody expected was that this particular appearance would end in disaster. The show opened with Kimmel's usual monologue, peppered with his characteristic political jabs and celebrity gossip, but there was something different in his energy that night, a restless aggression that seasoned viewers might have recognized as a warning sign. When Kimmel introduced Freeman, the audience erupted in the kind of warm applause reserved for true legends. Freeman walked out with his usual dignified stride, that familiar slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth as he waved to the crowd. The initial exchanges seemed pleasant enough. Kimmel complimented Freeman on his latest role, and the veteran actor responded with his typical grace, sharing an amusing anecdote about working with his co-stars. The audience laughed at all the right moments, and for the first few minutes, everything appeared to be proceeding exactly as planned. Freeman discussed his craft with the passion that has made him one of the most beloved figures in Hollywood, speaking about the responsibility he feels as an actor to tell meaningful stories. But then something shifted in Kimmel's demeanor. Perhaps it was the way Freeman commanded the room so effortlessly, or maybe it was the stark contrast between the actor's natural dignity and the host's increasingly desperate attempts at comedy. Whatever the trigger, Kimmel began steering the conversation in a more personal direction, asking probing questions about Freeman's past that seemed designed to provoke rather than inform. "You know, Morgan," Kimmel said with that smirk, that regular viewers know all too well. "You've been in this business for decades. You've seen it all, done it all. But there have been some controversies along the way, haven't there?" The question hung in the air like a toxic cloud, and Freeman's expression immediately hardened. The legendary actor, who had been leaning back comfortably in his chair, suddenly sat forward, his piercing eyes fixed directly on his host. "I'm not sure what you're referring to, Jimmy," Freeman replied, his voice carrying that unmistakable edge that anyone who knows the actor would recognize as a warning. The temperature in the studio seemed to drop several degrees as the audience sensed the sudden tension. This was not the friendly banter they had come to expect from Freeman's appearances on talk shows. Kimmel, either oblivious to the warning signs or deliberately ignoring them, pressed forward with the reckless confidence of someone who believes their platform makes them untouchable. "Oh, come on. You know exactly what I'm talking about," he said, leaning forward with predatory interest. "The allegations, the whispers, the stories that have followed you around Hollywood for years." The words hit the studio like a physical blow. Freeman's face transformed from mild irritation to something far more dangerous: controlled fury. His hands, which had been gesturing gracefully moments before, now gripped the arms of his chair with white-knuckled intensity. The audience, sensing they were witnessing something unprecedented, fell into an uncomfortable silence that seemed to stretch on forever. What happened next would change everything, setting in motion a confrontation that would dominate headlines and social media for days to come, ultimately revealing the true character of both men under the bright lights of live television. Freeman's voice, when he finally spoke, carried the weight of decades in Hollywood and the authority of a man who had earned his respect through talent and professionalism. "Jimmy," he said, each word measured and deliberate, "I came here tonight as a courtesy, to promote my work and have a pleasant conversation with you and your audience. What you're doing right now is beneath both of us." The camera captured every micro-expression on Freeman's face, the tightening around his eyes, the slight flare of his nostrils, the way his jaw set with determination. But Kimmel, displaying the kind of tone-deaf arrogance that had been building throughout his career, doubled down. "Hey, I'm just asking the questions that people want answers to," he said with a dismissive wave of his hand. "This is what journalism looks like, Morgan. This is what real interviews are about. Getting to the truth, not just promotional fluff." The audacity of comparing his tabloid-style ambush to actual journalism sent a visible shudder through the studio audience. Freeman's legendary composure began to crack, revealing the steel beneath the velvet. "Journalism?" he repeated, his voice rising slightly but maintaining that commanding quality that had made him one of cinema's most powerful presences. "You call this journalism? This is character assassination, masquerading as entertainment." The way he pronounced each syllable made it clear that Freeman was not just angry, he was disgusted. The tension in the studio was now palpable. Audience members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, some pulling out their phones to capture what was clearly becoming an historic moment. The production crew, visible in the background, exchanged nervous glances as they realized they were witnessing their host's reputation potentially crumbling in real time. Kimmel, perhaps sensing he was losing control of the situation but unable to back down without losing face, made the fatal decision to escalate further. "Look, Morgan, I respect your work, I really do, but you can't just ignore the elephant in the room forever," he said, his voice taking on that patronizing tone that had become his signature when dealing with guests who dared to push back against his agenda. "The elephant in the room?" Freeman's voice was now loaded with barely contained rage. "The only elephant in this room, Jimmy, is your complete lack of professionalism and basic human decency." The legendary actor leaned forward, his piercing gaze boring into Kimmel with laser-like intensity. "I've been in this business longer than you've been alive, and I've never encountered such blatant disrespect disguised as entertainment." The studio fell into a silence so complete that the hum of the cameras seemed deafening. Kimmel, for perhaps the first time in his career, appeared genuinely rattled. His usual smug confidence wavered as he faced down one of Hollywood's most respected figures, a man whose integrity was legendary and whose word carried weight far beyond the confines of a late-night talk show. "I'm not trying to disrespect you," Kimmel stammered, but his words rang hollow in the charged atmosphere. "I'm just doing my job here." It was a weak defense, and everyone in the studio knew it, including Kimmel himself. Freeman stood up slowly, his full height and presence dominating the stage in a way that made Kimmel shrink back into his chair. "Your job?" Freeman's voice carried a dangerous quiet that was somehow more intimidating than any shouting could have been. "Your job is to entertain people, to make them laugh, to provide a few minutes of escape from their daily struggles. Instead, you've chosen to become a vulture, feeding on gossip and innuendo." But this was only the beginning of what would become the most explosive confrontation in late-night television history, as Freeman prepared to deliver words that would cut deeper than any carefully crafted insult. "You want to know what's really tragic here, Jimmy?" Freeman's voice carried the full weight of his decades in Hollywood, each word delivered with surgical precision. "You had the opportunity to have a meaningful conversation with someone who has spent over 50 years perfecting their craft, someone who could have shared stories that would have genuinely entertained and inspired your audience. Instead, you chose to wallow in the gutter." The camera zoomed in on Freeman's face, capturing the disappointment and disgust etched in every line. Kimmel, now visibly sweating under the studio lights, attempted to regain control of his own show. "Morgan, you're being way too sensitive about this. This is just how television works these days. People expect—" But Freeman cut him off with a gesture that somehow managed to be both elegant and absolutely devastating. "Don't you dare tell me how television works," Freeman interrupted, his voice rising to fill every corner of the studio. "I was making television when you were still in diapers. I've worked with professionals who understood that entertainment doesn't require destroying someone's dignity." The audience gasped audibly at the raw power in Freeman's voice, many now openly recording the confrontation on their phones. The production team scrambled behind the cameras, clearly unsure whether to cut to commercial or let this historic meltdown continue to unfold. Kimmel's producers could be seen frantically gesturing from the sidelines, but their host seemed locked in a battle of wills that he was losing spectacularly. "You know what your real problem is, Jimmy?" Freeman continued, now fully unleashed. "You've confused cynicism with intelligence, cruelty with comedy. You think that tearing people down makes you seem clever, but all it really does is reveal your own insecurities and inadequacies." Each word landed like a physical blow, and Kimmel visibly flinched with every accusation. The host tried one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. "Look, Morgan, maybe we got off on the wrong foot here. Why don't we just—" But Freeman was having none of it. His years of experience dealing with difficult directors and demanding co-stars had taught him when someone was beyond redemption. "No, Jimmy. There's no wrong foot here. There's just wrong, period." Freeman's commanding presence dominated the stage as he looked directly into the camera, addressing the audience both in the studio and at home. "Ladies and gentlemen, you deserve better than this. You deserve hosts who respect their guests, who understand that entertainment doesn't require humiliation." The studio audience, initially shocked into silence, began to murmur their agreement. Several people could be heard saying, "He's right," and "This is embarrassing." The tide had completely turned against Kimmel, and everyone in the building could feel it. Kimmel, his face now flushed red with a mixture of anger and humiliation, made one final, catastrophic mistake. "You know what, Morgan? Maybe you're just too old school for modern television. Maybe you can't handle the heat anymore." The words hung in the air like a death sentence, and Freeman's expression shifted from disappointment to something far more dangerous. "Too old school?" Freeman repeated slowly, his voice dropping to that familiar, gravelly whisper that had narrated countless documentaries and brought characters to life on screen. "Let me tell you what old school means, Jimmy. It means having standards. It means treating people with respect. It means understanding that your platform comes with responsibility, not just privilege." The legendary actor took a step closer to Kimmel's desk, and his physical presence seemed to fill the entire stage. "What you've done here tonight isn't modern television, Jimmy. It's not edgy or contemporary or relevant. It's simply pathetic." The final word hit Kimmel like a sledgehammer, and for a moment the cocky host looked like he might actually break down on live television. But Freeman wasn't finished yet, and what he was about to say next would seal Kimmel's fate and provide the perfect setup for his dramatic exit from the show. Freeman straightened to his full height, and when he spoke again, his voice carried the authority of someone who had commanded respect from audiences worldwide for over 5 decades. "You know what the saddest part of this entire debacle is, Jimmy? It's that you had the chance to be better. You had the platform. You had the audience. You had the opportunity to elevate the conversation. Instead, you chose to drag it down into the mud with you." The camera captured every detail of Kimmel's face as these words hit home. His usual smirk had completely disappeared, replaced by a look of genuine shock and growing panic. The host, who had built his career on making others uncomfortable, was now experiencing that discomfort himself, and it was clear he had no idea how to handle it. "I've worked with legends in this industry," Freeman continued, his voice gaining momentum like a gathering storm. "Directors who changed cinema, actors who inspired generations, Writers who crafted stories that will outlive us all. And you know what they all had in common? Respect. Respect for their craft, respect for their colleagues, and respect for their audience. Something you clearly know nothing about. The studio audience was now completely silent, hanging on every word. Even the production crew had stopped their frantic signaling and stood transfixed by the power of Freeman's performance. This wasn't just an angry celebrity having a meltdown. This was a master craftsman delivering a lesson in professionalism and dignity. Freeman turned slightly to address the audience directly, his presence filling the entire studio. You deserve hosts who bring out the best in their guests, not the worst. You deserve entertainment that lifts you up rather than tears people down. And most importantly, you deserve honesty. His gaze swept across the audience before returning to Kimmel, with laser-like intensity. So let me be completely honest with all of you right now, Freeman said, his voice dropping to that familiar, commanding tone that had narrated everything from March of the Penguins to The Shawshank Redemption. This man sitting behind that desk has shown you exactly who he is tonight. He's shown you that when given the choice between class and cruelty, he chooses cruelty. When given the choice between respect and ratings, he chooses ratings. And when given the choice between building people up or tearing them down, he will always choose destruction. Kimmel opened his mouth as if to respond, but Freeman held up a hand that somehow conveyed more authority than any security guard ever could. No, Jimmy. You've said quite enough for one evening. Your words tonight have revealed more about your character than any guest ever could. The legendary actor began to remove his microphone, his movements deliberate and dignified even in the midst of this explosive confrontation. I came here tonight to talk about my work, to share some stories, maybe make people smile. Instead, I've been subjected to what can only be described as an ambush by someone who has confused shock value with entertainment value. As Freeman unclipped the small microphone from his jacket, the sound echoed through the silent studio like a gunshot. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. This was a man literally cutting ties with the show and everything it represented. I've been in this business for over 50 years, he said, placing the microphone carefully on Kimmel's desk. I've survived bad directors, terrible scripts, and industry upheavals that would have ended lesser careers. But I refuse to sit here and be disrespected by someone who wouldn't know genuine talent if it bit him on his rear end. The audience erupted in spontaneous applause, many rising to their feet in support of Freeman's stance. The sound was deafening, a clear indication of where their sympathies lay. Kimmel sat frozen behind his desk, his face a mask of humiliation and defeat, as his own audience turned against him. Freeman acknowledged the applause with a slight nod, then delivered his final devastating blow. Jimmy, you had Morgan Freeman on your show tonight. Do you understand how rare and precious that opportunity was? And you threw it away for cheap sensationalism and tabloid gossip. That's not just unprofessional. It's tragic. With that, Freeman turned and began walking toward the exit, his stride as confident and dignified as it had been when he first entered. The camera followed his every step as he made his way through the stunned studio audience, many of whom reached out to touch his hand or shoulder in support. The applause continued, growing even louder as Freeman reached the edge of the stage. Just before disappearing backstage, Freeman turned back one final time. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the studio without any amplification, "you deserve so much better than this." And with those words he was gone, leaving behind a shell-shocked host, a stunned audience, and what would undoubtedly become the most talked-about moment in late-night television history. The aftermath was swift and merciless. Social media exploded with clips of the confrontation, with overwhelming support for Freeman and harsh criticism of Kimmel's conduct. The show's ratings plummeted in the following weeks as viewers abandoned the program in droves, disgusted by what they had witnessed. Industry insiders whispered about the incident, with many questioning whether Kimmel had finally gone too far in his pursuit of controversy over class.